Thanks for being here. This is Last Story Tonight. If you enjoy real stories told simply and honestly, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this story meant something to you, hit like. It helps keep these kinds of stories going. I always read your comments, so feel free to share your thoughts below. That Tuesday morning, before the first frost had really settled in, I hugged Richard in the kitchen the way I always did before leaving for campus. He wore the navy coat he saves for client meetings. The collar brushed my cheek, and I caught a perfume I didn't own. Expensive, floral with a sharp citrus edge. Not mine, not anyone I knew. He laughed when I pulled back. Probably a client at the office went overboard, he said, reaching past me for the toaster. New condo tour today. You know how it is. I guess, I said, because I had a section on Dickinson to teach and 2 freshmen who'd stopped turning in anything after midterms. There are days when you pick the smaller fight. By late afternoon, in the faculty lounge, the scent was still in my head like a song fragment. I graded a stack of essays with red pencil and thought about how we used to trade ideas like baseball cards at dinner. His story leads, my lecture plans. That was years back. He left the paper, said he was done chasing quotes, and started chasing listings. The money was better. The hours weren't. That evening, I found 2 theater tickets face up on the kitchen table under the grocery list. We'd planned that show for a month, then I got sick. Fever, sore throat, the kind that makes your teeth ache. One ticket was torn, the other still stiff and whole. The date was last Friday. I stood at the counter with the light flicking unevenly above the sink, rereading time and seat number like they'd rearrange into a kinder version if I blinked hard enough. He came in late, loosened his tie, asked if there was a clean mug. He didn't look at the tickets. I didn't hold them up. The dishwasher hummed between us. 2 days later, I learned the missing details in the way small towns always provide them. A colleague mentioned, casually, that Richard had been seen at the theater, not alone, with Mary Ann. She used to sit in my seminar on American novels, all bright questions and relentless note-taking. Now she's a successful agent with perfect blazers, the one he often collaborates with. The phrase had sounded practical when he first used it. That afternoon, it sounded rehearsed. That night, I didn't confront him. I reheated soup, answered student emails, and read a short story that didn't move me at all. He told me about a closing that almost fell apart and how he rescued it. His voice was animated, like he used to be after nailing an interview in his reporting days. I watched his hands more than I listened. The ring he almost lost in the ocean one summer still didn't fit right. Next morning, walking across the frost-chapped parking lot to my office, I tried to line up facts like I was teaching an essay on evidence. Perfume that didn't belong to me. A used ticket beside an unused one. Mary Ann at the theater he knew I'd wanted to see. No admission, no argument, no scene. Just data points that landed where they wanted. That evening, after my last class, I stopped by the small market on the corner for milk and oranges. At checkout, the clerk asked about my weekend, and I said it was fine. On the drive home, the sun went down over the inlet, quick and blunt, and I realized I had spent 24 hours measuring my life in observations, not decisions. When I walked through our door, the kitchen still smelled faintly of his cologne, the one I'd picked out for him years ago. I stood there longer than made sense, aware of how a home holds everything you let happen and everything you ignore. The next week moved in straight lines. Class prep, office hours, 2 committee meetings that could have been emails. At home, we stayed efficient. We divided chores without talking about it, like old lab partners who knew the steps by muscle memory. He set out the trash Wednesday night. I paid the electric bill online and left the confirmation number on a sticky note by the fridge. We didn't fight. We also didn't drift toward each other the way we used to when a day had been long. On Thursday evening, our friends on Ocean Street hosted a small reception for a visiting poet. The living room smelled like baked apples and mulled wine. Richard stood near the window with a cluster of realtors and spouses, telling some story about a bidding war that turned when he found a clause no one else caught. Laughter landed at the right beats. Across the room, Marianne was in a tailored gray suit, nails a calm, expensive pink. When she spoke, he leaned in the way he used to lean into my office doorway, head tilted, genuinely listening. I caught the angle of his shoulders and felt it like a draft. I kept to the book people. We traded small notes about the poet's new collection, which was good but not stubborn enough. I laughed in the right places, too. When Marianne passed me on the way to the kitchen, she touched my forearm lightly and said, "Lovely to see you, Professor." The tone was perfect, neutral, almost warm. I answered, "You too," and stepped back so she could reach the cheese board. It was all in the choreography. The next afternoon after my seminar, a new colleague paused at my office door. Daniel, the senior art history professor we'd hired in August, was the kind of quiet that doesn't demand attention, it earns it. Widower, the department chair had said when he joined. He held the novel I'd mentioned in class. "Good class," he said. "Your students argue like they're discovering their own voices as the sentences come out." "That's generous," I said. "I'm bribing them with participation points." He smiled and didn't move on. "I'm going to get coffee." "Would you like one?" I hesitated, then grabbed my coat. In the campus cafe, we took a table by the radiator that thumped every 8 minutes. We talked about syllabi, dorm food, the way the bookstore never actually has the book you assigned until week 3. He listened without jumping in to top my story with one of his, a skill rarer than it should be. When we stood to leave, he studied my face like he was weighing whether to say something. "Forgive me if this is out of line," he said softly, "but you look like someone who knows a lot and says very little. That's heavy work I didn't ask how he knew. Grief teaches people to read weather others miss." "I'm managing," I said. "Most of us are," he answered not unkindly. Saturday morning, I graded until my wrist ached. Richard texted from a showing. "Running late." "Don't wait on lunch," I didn't. Late afternoon, he came home with a bouquet that looked like it came from the upscale shop on Main. Tulips in January, wrapped in brown paper. "For the table," he said like it was nothing. "They're beautiful," I said, and placed them in the tall glass vase. We ate pasta he made with jarred marinara. He asked about the poet's reading. I asked if the inspection had gone well. We passed each other careful, clean questions and stopped there. Sunday, after I prepped lectures, I walked the path behind the high school to the inlet, where the water had that cold, flat winter color. I watched a couple walking a dog in matching raincoats and tried to picture the last time Richard and I had walked anywhere without an errand attached. I couldn't. That night, I stacked my papers, set my alarm, and left the kitchen light on as usual. When 9 o'clock slid past, I didn't check my phone. For years, I'd timed my evenings to the sound of his car in the driveway, to the clatter of keys on the counter. This time, I pulled on a sweater, drove to the all-night diner, and ate pancakes with my book open, a middle seat in my own life. I drove back at 11, put the tulips in fresh water, and went to bed without listening for the door. By the next week, the snow had turned to wet slush that stuck to everything: boots, steps, even the tires of my car. I started taking the long route home, through the park and past the coffee shop Daniel liked. Sometimes he was there, reading with his glasses halfway down his nose, that calm focus of someone who has learned to fill empty hours. One afternoon, after a department meeting that ran too long, I saw him at his usual table and waved. He smiled, closed his book, and gestured to the chair across from him. I sat down, still carrying the irritation of the meeting. We talked about nothing urgent, how campus looked before budget cuts, which local diner still made good pie, why students think deadlines are flexible by nature. It was easy. No performance, no second-guessing every word. We fell into a rhythm. Coffee after class, a walk if the weather allowed. When I spoke, he listened like every word was part of a longer story he wanted to understand. He told me about his wife, how cancer rewired his sense of time, how every plan after that felt provisional. He didn't say it dramatically, he said it like a fact, and maybe that was what I needed. Someone who treated pain as something you manage, not something you perform. One evening in late February, rain came down in cold sheets. I'd forgotten my umbrella in the office. Daniel offered me a ride, but his car was closer than mine, so we ran for it under his coat. By the time we reached the lot, we were both soaked. He laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't apologize for joy. He took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I don't know why that small gesture cracked something open in me. Maybe it was the ease, the lack of strategy. My eyes burned before I could stop it. "Sorry," I said, "it's been a long semester." "You don't have to explain," he said quietly. He didn't move closer, didn't touch me again. He just waited until I steadied. We stood there, water dripping from our sleeves, the sound of the highway in the distance. After that night, we didn't need excuses. We met after lectures, shared meals at a small Italian place near the harbor, exchanged short emails about books and exhibitions. His words were spare, precise. Mine became lighter without meaning to. He started calling me Elaine, like it was a name he'd been saving, not just using. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even feel the need to. What grew between us wasn't scandal, it was shelter. One Friday evening, after a gallery opening, he walked me to my car. The lot was nearly empty. He stopped before I opened the door, looked at me as if waiting for permission that wasn't spoken. When he touched my hand, the air felt sharper, clearer. "This will complicate things," he said. "I know," I whispered, and then he kissed me. Slow, deliberate, not searching for an answer but giving one. No fireworks, no promises, just warmth after too long without it. Driving home, I kept both hands on the wheel, breathing like I'd surfaced from a deep pool. I didn't think of Richard. I didn't think of rules. I only thought about how quiet the world felt when something finally made sense again. A week later, Richard started cooking dinner again. Out of nowhere, he decided to make roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, the kind of meal he hadn't touched since before things went sideways between us. He poured wine, asked about my classes, even laughed when I told him about a student who wrote an essay comparing Emily Dickinson to Taylor Swift. It would have looked like reconciliation to anyone watching, but I could feel the effort humming beneath every gesture. His new kindness felt like a man trying to rebuild something he didn't quite believe in. That weekend, he invited me to drive out to the coast to see a property he was thinking about for us. It was a big place, too polished, all glass and stone, perched above the water like a magazine ad. He walked me through every room, describing where the office could go, how the light would hit in the mornings. I nodded, smiled when expected. It could be a new start, he said. Maybe, I answered, though my voice didn't sound like mine. I watched his hands trace the marble counter. His wedding ring glinted, catching the pale light. It looked like a symbol he was still trying to convince himself he deserved to wear. On the way home, he turned on the radio, the car filled with the kind of old song couples slow dance to in movies. I stared out the window, thinking about how Marianne had probably sat in that same passenger seat, about how he'd probably used that same calm voice with her. He must have felt my distance because he reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, steady. I didn't pull away, but I didn't close my grip either. That night, I sat in the living room after he'd gone to bed, scrolling through my phone. There was a message from Daniel. How did the house look? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, beautiful, empty. He replied a minute later, do you ever think honesty can exist halfway? I typed, maybe that's all we get. Half-truths dressed up as good intentions. Then, after a pause, he sent, sometimes half the truth is the most a person can manage when they're trying to love without breaking everything else. I put the phone down, feeling the words settle. It wasn't romantic, it was real. And real, I'd learned, was messier than betrayal or forgiveness. The next morning, Richard brought me coffee in bed. Let's take a weekend off, he said, go somewhere. Just us. I looked at him, at the hope behind the suggestion. Sure, I said, because fighting about it would mean defining what we were avoiding. At work, people talked. Small-town departments run on whispers, and ours had a steady supply. Someone mentioned seeing me with Daniel at the cafe downtown. I didn't deny it. There was nothing to deny, not in the technical sense, but I knew what they meant, what they suspected. That evening, Richard came home early, humming. He asked if I wanted Thai or pizza. His eyes were soft again, familiar. And for the first time, I realized what I was seeing wasn't affection, it was fear. He'd lost control of the narrative, and now he was trying to reclaim it by being the husband he thought I missed. But the thing about pretending long enough is that even sincerity starts to sound rehearsed. While he ordered dinner, I stood at the sink, staring at the reflection in the dark window. Two people performing the remnants of a marriage. We both knew what we were doing. He lied to keep the story alive. I lied because I wasn't ready to end the chapter. Later that night, when he fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, listening to his breathing. I thought about how easy it was to confuse guilt with affection. I thought about Daniel, about the simplicity of honesty that didn't demand an explanation. And I realized, with a kind of quiet certainty, that every lie we told, his or mine, wasn't about cruelty. It was about survival. By early spring, the snow had melted into gray puddles, and with it came the gossip. College towns have a way of turning whispers into weather, constant, unavoidable. Someone from the English department mentioned seeing me at the cafe with Daniel. Another asked, too casually, how long we'd been collaborating. I answered with a small smile, neither confirming nor denying. There was no point correcting what people wanted to believe. That evening, Richard came home earlier than usual. He didn't slam doors or demand explanations. He just placed his keys on the counter and said, I know. I didn't ask what he meant. I could feel it, he continued. The distance, the waiting. We just traded each other for different versions of loneliness, didn't we? His tone was steady, not cruel, like he'd been rehearsing the words and finally ran out of time to keep them in. I think we both stopped trying a long time ago, I said. He nodded, then looked at me as if trying to remember what we used to talk about before everything turned careful. I didn't want to be the one who lost first, he said quietly. That's all. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to one. A few days later, Marianne sent me a message. Just one line. You're stronger than I thought. Not everyone can forgive. Forgive. The words sat wrong in my throat. I hadn't forgiven her. I hadn't even tried. I wasn't angry anymore. But that wasn't grace. It was fatigue. I saw her again by chance in the parking lot outside the grocery store. She was wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. When she spotted me, she hesitated, then smiled the way people do when they're not sure which version of politeness will work. Marianne, I said, walking over. Elaine. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I said, We picked a bad place for the truth, didn't we? She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Maybe. But at least we walked out of it alive. Her voice trembled a little on the last word. I almost felt sorry for her. That night, Richard and I ate dinner in silence. Real silence, not the loaded kind that fills a room with everything unsaid. He poured himself a drink, stared at the glass for a long moment, and said, You know, I don't hate you. I don't hate you either, I replied. We didn't toast to that. Later, as I was cleaning up, I found one of his shirts draped over the chair, faint traces of cologne still clinging to it. I folded it neatly and set it on the bed without thinking. He was watching me from the doorway. You still do that, he said. The small kindnesses. I guess habits die slower than love, I said. He smiled, tired, not unkind, and walked away. The next morning, the sun came through the blinds sharp and pale. I drove to campus early, parked near the faculty building, and sat in the car longer than necessary. Daniel was already outside talking to a student. He looked up, saw me, and raised a hand. I waved back, but didn't get out right away. For the first time, I wasn't sure what I wanted from him. Comfort, connection, or just proof that I could still be seen by someone who didn't expect an apology. When I finally stepped out, the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. It felt like the start of something, but not necessarily something new, just something honest enough to survive what came before. That night, I found another text from Marianne. I hope you find peace. I stared at it, then deleted it without replying. Peace wasn't something you found. It was something you built slowly, after running out of ways to lie, to others and to yourself. The morning he started packing, the house didn't look any different, just quieter in the way spaces get when intention replaces routine. Richard folded clothes with care, separating what was his from what had long ago blurred into ours. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing cold coffee, watching him move through the house like a man trying not to disturb a ghost. He paused by the window. I thought we'd fight more, he said. There's nothing left to win, I answered. He gave a faint smile, the kind you wear when you've already decided to let go. I used to think staying was strength, he said. Turns out it was fear. Fear of what? Being the first to admit it was over. We sat across from each other, the table between us bare except for one chipped mug. No tears, no raised voices. Just exhaustion that had turned into acceptance. I knew about Daniel, he said after a long pause. The words landed softly, almost mercifully. How long? I asked. Since the first time you came home lighter, he said. You looked different. Happier, I guess. I didn't want to be the man who demanded explanations when I had my own to hide. He didn't elaborate, but I knew what he meant. Marianne, the perfume, the theater tickets. He hadn't confessed before because silence had been easier to manage than consequences. So, We both lied for comfort, I said. He nodded. Mine was pretending everything could still work if I tried hard enough. Yours was pretending you were just lonely, I wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. When he finally zipped the suitcase, he looked around the room one last time. The framed photo from a trip years ago, the plant that never quite died, the faint dent on the sofa cushion where he always sat. You'll keep the house? He asked. For now, I said. I'm not ready to move again. He nodded, carried the suitcase to the door, then turned back. I hope he treats you well, he said quietly. He does, I replied, though I wasn't sure what well meant anymore. After the door shut behind him, I waited for the familiar crash of regret. It didn't come. What filled the air wasn't guilt. It was calm, the kind that feels like standing in a room after a storm and realizing the roof held. That evening, Daniel came by. I hadn't told him to, but he must have sensed it. He stood in the doorway holding a paper bag with takeout and 2 bottles of mineral water. He's gone, I said. Daniel nodded, set the food down, and studied me for a moment. I can stay, he offered. You shouldn't be alone tonight. I'm fine, I said, and meant it. You don't have to be fine, he said gently. I know, I replied, but I need to be. He hesitated, then said, You could come with me. Just for a few days. My place is quiet. It was tempting, simple, safe. But the thought of walking into someone else's space, even his, felt premature, like repainting walls before the plaster had dried. I can't, I said softly. Not yet. He nodded, accepting the answer without taking it as rejection. That was one of the things I admired about him. He understood boundaries weren't always about distance. After he left, I washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and sat by the window, watching headlights move across the street. The world outside kept functioning, cars, neighbors, dogs barking. I wasn't shattered or saved, just present. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder where Richard was or who he might be talking to. The absence wasn't pain anymore, it was space. And space, I realized, might be the only honest beginning either of us had left. A full year passed before I noticed I'd stopped marking time by what used to hurt. Seasons folded into one another quietly. I sold the old house and moved into a small cottage near the shore, a place that creaks when the wind changes and smells faintly of salt even in winter. I teach literature online now, mostly to students scattered across the country. The distance suits me. Most mornings start the same: coffee, emails, a walk by the water. I've learned that solitude isn't an absence. It's a room you can finally breathe in. The kitchen windowsill is crowded with small pots of herbs I'm learning to keep alive. Sometimes I still overwater them. Daniel visits once or twice a month. He brings fresh fish or a stack of books he thinks I'll like. We cook, talk, and sometimes sit for long stretches without needing to fill the air. We're not a couple anymore. Whatever we were has settled into something quieter and more forgiving. He still looks at me the same way. Steady, curious, but without the expectation that love needs to prove itself. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox with Richard's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was some leftover paperwork. But it wasn't. The letter was short, half a page, written in his careful, deliberate style. I'm remarried now, he wrote. She's kind and patient in ways I didn't know how to be. You were right. Love isn't about staying perfect. It's about staying when it gets hard. I didn't stay. I ran. I hope you found what I couldn't give you. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. No bitterness, no nostalgia, just a small recognition that time had done what we couldn't. Later that evening, Daniel stopped by with groceries and noticed the letter on the counter. From him? He asked. I nodded. He's married again. He didn't comment, just handed me a lemon and started unpacking vegetables. After a moment, he said, You okay? Yeah, I said, realizing it was true. I think we both just finished the part we were supposed to play. He smiled faintly, that quiet smile of his that never asks for reassurance. After he left, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the last bit of daylight fade into the water. The cup left a small ring on the table. For a second, I thought about cleaning it immediately, then decided to leave it there until morning. The aroma of the coffee lingered, warm and familiar. This time it was mine alone. No trace of borrowed perfume, no shadow of someone else's story. Just mine. And I understood then. Endings don't always arrive with closure or punishment. Sometimes they just give you back your name, your pace, your own quiet air. This wasn't forgiveness. It was something better. Peace that didn't need an audience.